Stalin's dark psychology, why fear is more powerful than love. Hitler wanted to be loved. He craved admiration, applause, and devotion. Stalin wanted none of that. Stalin wanted to be feared, and the difference between those two men and those two strategies tells you everything about the darkest truth in all of psychology. Fear is more powerful than love, and Stalin proved it. Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union for nearly 30 years. In that time, he is estimated to have caused the deaths of between 6 and 20 million of his own people. Not enemies, his own people. And yet, for decades, millions worshipped him, wept when he died, named their children after him. How does a man who murdered millions become a god to his own nation? The answer lies not in politics, it lies in psychology, and it's one of the most disturbing stories ever told. To understand Stalin's psychology, you have to go back to a small town in Georgia called Gori, 1878. Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili, the man who would later rename himself Stalin, meaning man of steel, was born into poverty and violence. His father, Beso, was a drunk who beat him regularly. His mother, Keke, was fiercely protective, but could not stop the abuse. Psychologists who have studied Stalin's early life identify a pattern that would define his entire rule. A child who learned that the world was divided into those who hurt and those who were hurt, and he decided very early which side he would be on. At 16, he won a scholarship to a seminary in Tbilisi, a school for Orthodox priests. He was brilliant, disciplined, and ruthless even then. He was expelled at 20. Not for bad grades, for spreading Marxist revolutionary literature. The priest became a revolutionary, and the revolutionary became something far more dangerous. Stalin's rise to power after Lenin's death in 1924 is itself a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He was not the most brilliant man in the room. He was not the most charismatic. He was the most patient and the most ruthless. Psychologists have identified 4 core mechanisms Stalin used to control 200 million people. Each one is more disturbing than the last. Stalin's most powerful tool was not the Gulag. It was not the firing squad. It was Paranoia. He created a system where anyone could be an enemy, a neighbor, a colleague, a friend, even a family member. The Great Purge of 1936 to 1938 saw over 750,000 people executed, not because they were guilty, but because the system required enemies. And when you live in a world where anyone could denounce you at any moment, you stop trusting everyone. You become isolated, and isolated people are easy to control. Psychologists call this manufactured social isolation, the deliberate destruction of trust networks to prevent organized resistance. Stalin didn't just kill his enemies, he made everyone feel like a potential enemy, including his closest allies. Here is something that most people don't know about Stalin. He was often kind, warm even. He remembered birthdays. He called people by their first names. He told jokes, and then he had them shot. This was not random. It was deliberate. Behavioral psychologists call this variable ratio reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. When you cannot predict whether an action will lead to reward or punishment, you become hypervigilant. You work harder to please. You become desperate to read every signal correctly. Stalin's inner circle lived in permanent psychological terror, not because he was always cruel, but because they could never predict when the cruelty would come. Nikita Khrushchev, who would later denounce Stalin, described the experience of dining with him. Every time I left Stalin's table, I never knew if I would make it home. Stalin understood something that most dictators miss. People don't just want to obey, they want to believe. His propaganda machine didn't just celebrate Stalin, it created a narrative of collective suffering and collective glory. The Soviet people were not victims of his policies. They were heroes of a great historical struggle. The famines that killed millions were reframed as necessary sacrifices for industrialization. The purges were presented as the heroic defense of the revolution against hidden enemies. Psychologists call this narrative reframing, the process of giving suffering a meaning that makes it not only bearable, but noble. And it worked. Millions of Soviet citizens who lost family members to Stalin's policies continued to believe in him, because to stop believing was to admit that their suffering had been meaningless. By the 1940s, Stalin had achieved something that Hitler never quite managed. He had made himself into a deity. His image was everywhere, in every school, every office, every home. Children were taught to thank Stalin for their food, their education, their lives. Psychologists who study authoritarian personality cults point to a critical mechanism. When a leader is positioned not as a politician, but as a father figure or god, criticism becomes not just dangerous, but psychologically impossible. To criticize Stalin was not to disagree with a policy. It was to commit a kind of blasphemy, to betray not just the state, but reality itself. This is what psychologists call the totalist reality, a world in which the leader's version of truth becomes the only possible truth, and dissent is not just punished, but psychologically inconceivable. But Stalin's greatest psychological weapon eventually became his greatest weakness. The paranoia he manufactured in others consumed him too. By the late 1940s, Stalin trusted no one. He rotated his personal staff constantly to prevent loyalty from forming. He ate alone. He slept in different rooms every night, so no one could predict where he would be. In February 1953, Stalin suffered a stroke in his private dining room. He lay on the floor for hours, possibly an entire day, before anyone dared check on him. His guards were afraid. To enter without being called was to risk execution. The man who had ruled 200 million people died alone on the floor because he had made everyone too afraid to help him. On March 5, 1953, Joseph Stalin died. His inner circle, men who had lived in terror of him for decades, reportedly felt not grief, but relief. Khrushchev later wrote, "We were all afraid of him, and when he died, we breathed again." So, what do we take from Stalin's psychology? Hitler showed us that love can be weaponized. Stalin showed us something darker, that fear is more efficient, more durable, and harder to resist. The mechanisms Stalin used: manufactured paranoia, unpredictable punishment, narrative reframing, the totalist reality. These are not relics of Soviet history. They appear in authoritarian governments today, in high-control workplaces, in abusive relationships, in online communities that punish dissent and reward conformity. Knowing these mechanisms doesn't make you immune to them, but it makes you harder to trap inside them. Next video: what happens when psychology itself becomes a weapon of the state? The CIA's Project MK Ultra, the most disturbing psychology experiment in history, and what it reveals about the limits of the human mind. Subscribe so you don't miss it.